Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here, and welcome to another edition of Court Call with Ronnie Nunn. And Ronnie, we've got some really interesting calls that deal with the notion of referees that want to either control the game or kind of get out of the way. And I think that's a difficult situation to handle in real time. So how does that work when you're a ref on the court?
Well, there's always a belief out there of refs getting out of the way and let the players do their thing, and that's important. But there's a guideline to reffing, and there's a guideline to consistency, and there's a guideline to good judgment. And if we can bring that together all the time with all officials everywhere, we get some pretty good games in which players get a sense of what is right and what is wrong, and they're familiar with it. They just take it to the line all the time when in some situations. But having said that, we have some plays here today where a majority of them are really good decisions on what I would think are tough plays, and we can talk about them as we go.
Absolutely. Well, let's break into the first one, which was LeBron James and Jimmy Butler kind of got in a little bit of a tussle in this tough game between the Heat and the Bulls. And we have a guy, Nadem Rohr of Big Timer 32, wants to know, did they manage this well? Was this a good call to call a double technical foul?
Yeah, Coach, it really was a good call. And, this is a fast break. The guys are trying to get a handle on it. And all of a sudden, you find there's no longer 10 players going into the front court. There's only, 8 of them. The good news about the three-man game is there's 2 referees in the front court, and everybody knows we've had 2 referees for a very long time in basketball. They can manage that front game. The good news here is the referee in the trail who's waiting to go says, I cannot go, and I got to see how this is going to thaw out, so to speak. And he stays right with it. And, yes, they're both kind of the culprits in this. There's a little bit of a leg deal, a foot deal, a thing to the neck. There's a grab. They're just unhappy with how the play broke up down their way when they had a chance to score and defend. So long story short, he stays with it. And because they take too long to unravel, he gives the tech. Now, the commentary is very good by the announcers in Van Gundy and Breen in that he waited to see if the break had done something. That's a kind of a thing you feel. Sometimes you have to call that play. I mean, if those guys started getting into it a little bit more and they didn't look like they were going to throw out, you need to call that technical then to bring attention to their issue so you don't have a problem in the game with 2 players.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of reminds me of when Rodman and Karl Malone were getting tied up because each one of them desperately wanted to make it seem like they were the victim, yet also inflict a little bit of something there. Luckily, these guys aren't probably as tough as those guys because, you can see a little foot to the face, which looked intentional. LeBron looked like he wanted to get him back with another foot. So, I like the double technical most of the time because certainly in this respect, it kind of chilled them out and got them back into, playing the right way.
This kind of poise comes from experience. This kind of poise comes from mimicking other officials you finally see. A younger official in this framework, even at the NBA level, might think, oh, I better get the text now. I bet there's a sense of really absorbing that and digesting it. And it really comes from experience and skill set. And it's great to see his growth as a person in officiating. He's representing guys that have reached that level like myself, where there is poise in the work, and you wonder how those guys do it when you first come to the league. You try to do what they do, but it doesn't beat experience and it doesn't beat time. And that's an example of time, experience, and skill set.
Absolutely. Well, let's look at the next play then, which is Brook Lopez setting a screen when the Blazers and the Rockets met up. And the question here is it seemed like he was set, but both referees had it dead to rights on an offensive call and a turnover. So give us an insight into their mindset of why they both made this call.
Well, the reason why they both make this call is this is an overlapping coverage. Each one of them has a piece of this coverage because it's a pick and roll. It's a little lower than the free throw line, which means the official in the lead position under the basket, that's his look. And also the trail official, which is also on the same side of the court. Strong side ball, strong side officiating. There's 2 guys always where the ball is on the strong side. And they both get a piece in their view of an offensive foul. 2 things went on. Very extended legs. And on another angle, I saw there was a great show of Lopez's shoulder that caught Lynn. Even though Lynn may be embellishing a tad, he really gets kind of nailed there, and you can really see it. It's subtle. And both guys, which makes you know the call is legit, even if we don't have all the angles, they respond beautifully to an offensive foul worthy of a call.
Well, let's move on to our next clip, which is P.J. Tucker in the open court against the Clippers when the Suns took them on. Marvin Montecillo wants to know how he was able to get a continuation foul on what appeared to be two separate plays.
You know, the best way to understand up fake for everybody out there is recognize an elevator coming down while an elevator goes up. And you got to have an elevator going up while a player is coming down or the other elevator is coming down onto him. On this particular play, you know, Barnes is already down, and now we see Tucker gather himself to go up. That makes the play dead, even though there was contact earlier, and that's a foul, there's no question. But that makes the continuation dead. You can't have a break in continuation. Another play like that is a jump stop. If you get fouled in the air on the jump stop and you come down and then re-up yourself, that also is a dead play.
Fantastic insight. Again, another thing that no one knows, I'm sure, is that a jump stop after the foul occurs is not a continuation like it used to be, because certainly I didn't know that. And what I find lucky for Barnes was that had he gone up the way he's supposed to, Barnes would have been probably upended and landed on his head. So there was some lucky notion there for him. The one thing that's interesting is that the refs did think about it, and they might have even talked to each other about it before giving it to him. So that's the only interesting notion of how they got to that point with more than one referee and some time to think about it. They still gave it to him.
Yeah, I don't think the official that actually scored the goal, I think he thought about it. I know this official very well, too, because these guys were young when I was in the league, and they were coming up, and his growth has been very good as well. I just think some plays are unusual, and again, experience, time, knowledge of the game, and the rules and the interpretation of them help get to a place we got now. Now, he scored the goal. All I could say is I would not have scored that goal because two separate acts occurred, and you got to be able to separate them.
Well, good stuff. Let's move on to the next clip, which is all sorts of contact happening in this really intense Blazers-Rockets game. Guys flying around and going for loose balls, and the referees used some restraint here to let them play. Do you agree with their take on this?
You know, when I first saw it, I said, I don't know if I can agree with it. And, you know, this is how fast things happen. But let me make sure everyone understands. I agree with this non-calling decisions that went on, by the way, at both ends of the floor, which everybody always looks for and talks about, consistency at both ends of the floor. And it's really nice to have within seconds, within 10 seconds, almost similar acts occurring with a loose ball. Two players may go to a ball at the same time. I always use as a guideline, and I also taught this, the first player that can touch that ball or get to that ball is the guy that is ahead of the game. And if he gets, you know, knocked over because of it, his opponent is the fouler. And then there's, you know, some things about that go against that. But I try to use that as a guideline. Here, it's real interesting. Both players get to the ball simultaneously. You know, a fraction of one hand versus the other, and then the collision. That gets you to go back to saying, look, the collisions were not overt other than, you know, the good physical play to go for a loose ball in the game of basketball. We don't see this very often, but these were two good plays at both ends. Nothing that could cause real injury, just aggressive play, not anything extra on the play after they came down on each other or what have you. But when you're going for a ball, it's like steal the bacon. Both people go out there, and it's pretty equal to see what occurs. Like I say, usually the first one has an advantage, but this was simultaneous. I thought they did a very good job on this. This is not easy, and of course, fans get you worked up. There's a lot of noise in the arena, and they want something for their team.
I agree. I think it was wonderful to watch these two teams slug it out like this and let them just sort of decide it to some degree. I think that there probably is an element of, you know, when they're feeling the game and you're out there, you can sense whether or not these guys are, the word they use is chippy a lot. And I almost feel like there are certain times when if we've already had issues already with guys getting really physical, where that would be one of those times where you'd have to say, listen, stop it now. Let's call a foul or two and get control. But this game was pretty clean throughout the game, and there wasn't that chippiness. And I feel like that might have influenced them as well.
You know, that's a very good point. You know, you manage a game based on how the players are responding to the whistle. and if they have any extra tensions in the game that you're beginning to notice, or contacts are on the border of flagrants, but they're hard fouls. These all come into that. And I think in this particular scenario, and from what you're telling me during the game, there was good aggressive play. And by the way, this is an ongoing treasure that's been carried along in the NBA, because we've wanted and we've made changes so the game has fluidity to it. So even these kind of contacts don't look as bad as they could have been years ago, when there was a higher level of contact being permitted to go on. So the fluidity, the freedom of movement, the physicality of getting to a ball free to each player, this is what creates some good game here. And by the way, I think the guys did a good job on both ends, letting this sort of let them play, which kind of connotes that they weren't calling fouls. They didn't have to call fouls on this, and that's the plus in this.
Absolutely. Well, we have our last clip by Mike Meyer, who suggested that we look at it because the inbounds play for the final shot in regulation of the Houston Blazers game appeared to take a lot more than 5 seconds of real time. But Ronnie, we talked about this before. Explain to us how that 5 seconds is supposed to really be called by a human referee.
Well, the news here is that a referee in this situation is ready to count out 5, and it's his own tempo for 5. Now, it's not the 5 seconds that the clock tempo is. It's a human tempo. And I always think in basketball, there's probably at least a half second later. When I counted it out as a human 5, I got the release at around 4, and with the official there, he got the release within 5. So we find out later when you put the clock on it, it's about 6, or maybe even 6.5. Now, there's been talk about putting a clock on this play and putting a horn or something on it so the officials are absolved of doing it. It has yet to come, and it might. I mean, it's been talked about while I was the director, but it hasn't come to really being reckoned with to make that change.
Yeah, it's interesting because, certainly, yeah, in real time it's longer. You can count him out. He gets that 4th count. It's on the release, not when Harden has to catch it, which is not that new anymore, but at one point was a new rule, I believe.
Yeah.
And so here's my other thing is the guy hit the shot. So it's like, I don't know. I love plays like that. I was very impressed that Harden took his time because you saw him really milk his cut. And everyone gets all up in arms as it gets closer and closer. But he was amazingly calm and collected to be able to hold his position before he cut to get open, which got him open. You could argue that that's the only way he would have gotten that open shot to tie the game. And, other than that, they would have gotten the 5-second call, and it wouldn't have mattered. The game was over for them anyway.
The key is, what do we want to do with the 5-second counts? Because the people that are not for the Houston Rockets say there's a 6-second count there, and that should have never been a score.
Yeah.
So I think the conversation will go on to find out what we're going to do. But I think in the human aspect of it, this was a legitimate count. In both counts I thought it was released on the human side, him within 5, me right at 4. So we were a second off on the count for people, but the clock, when you put a stopwatch to it, went to 6. So any way you want to do it, officials say, however you want me to referee to play, I will referee it. If you want to put a stop clock on it, so be it.
Terrific stuff. Well, we learned, again, even more rule interpretations we might not have known before. And really, this was a pleasure to watch how these guys are managing the game and either affecting the outcome appropriately or getting out of the way and letting the players decide. Very important, but also what you said is it's experience that you need to have to understand how that works.
Yeah, and you got to process it, and you have to be in those situations to know how that all comes together. Some people call it feel, but it really is staying within the guidelines of understanding judgment. And there's guidelines to judgment. There's contacts to judgment, and you got to stay with those contacts and understand them, and you get good results as we see here in these various clips.
Well, thanks for joining us, everybody. Another great episode of Court Call. Don't forget, if you see a call out there that you don't agree with or want us to review, make sure to tweet us using the hashtag Court Call. Give us the time, the quarter, the date would be very nice, and the 2 teams, so it makes it easier on us to filter. And again, don't forget, at B-Ball Breakdown, we're not a channel, we're a conversation. You in?
I'm in, Coach. Can't wait for the next one to go.